Hello everyone, I'm Professor Mark Baines with Concordia University and welcome to Exercise Physiology for Sport. And today we're going to be talking about, in the week 3 of our Exercise Physiology course, energy systems as it relates to training, as well as hormonal response to exercise. And first and foremost, once again, we're going to talk about some concepts that are important for everyone to make sure we clarify. Anyone watching the video that's not in the course, let alone for recent concepts we've covered in this course thus far. First and foremost, body weight exercises are not necessarily easier or better. Many of you in your discussion board posts refer to beginning with bodyweight exercise, and that sounds like a reasonable idea. It's just not necessarily the case where it's easier or better. A push-up is much more difficult than taking 2 light dumbbells and laying on a bench and doing a basic press with 5, 10, 15 pounds. Most people don't weigh 5, 10, 15, 30, 40, 50 pounds. They weigh 180, 180, somewhere in there or more weight-wise, so it's going to be a whole lot more difficult to do a bodyweight exercise. So it makes no sense to say you'd start with body weight if we're talking about some exercises. A bodyweight squat, however, is going to be easier than adding load to a squat. So we want to make sure we cease using that concept of saying, I like to do bodyweight exercises first, or bodyweight exercises are better, or bodyweight exercises are more efficient. Those are all too strong of generalizations, and they're just not necessarily true. There's nothing wrong with utilizing bodyweight exercises. Don't get me wrong here, but don't refer to it as either easier or better or more efficient. It all depends on what the primary goal is and depending upon what the level of the athletes are who we're talking about. Obviously, we want people to be able to do both, externally loaded exercises as well as bodyweight type exercises, but be careful about what you refer to as easier or better. That said, technique is king. I'm going to reiterate this again. I'm not sure in the second week if many of you had watched the week 2 video, let alone the week 1 video, because I'd reiterated a couple times. I'm going to say it here again, how important technique is from the standpoint of the most important thing you focus on, and you do so by making sure you repeat motions very slowly. If it's not performing, people are not performing the exercise well, could be an issue if you're not teaching it well, but more than anything else, you've got to keep slowing people down slower and slower and slower until basically it's going so slow it feels ridiculous. Good is what you tell your athletes. Do you feel ridiculous? You kind of look a little ridiculous. But if you want to not do it slow, then make it look fluid, make it look smooth, have proper control. And if you do, I will let you move either faster or with load, not running with load. And by the way, I want to make sure this is really clear right here and now. Don't put weight vests on people while they're running and jumping. Don't, okay? You might think, well, it's a better thing to add more load to it. Unless you're already someone who can jump vertically 40 inches, or you can already sprint sub 10 seconds, and you're already superhuman whereby you need some sort of incredibly difficult thing to add to an exercise, which you're really going to be doing, even though biomechanics is not technically part of exercise physiology, it's very much related. So mechanically, you're going to alter someone's movement. If someone moves less well, they don't move as well because you added load, your decision to add load to them was a poor choice. And I've never encountered an athlete that moved better because we added load to them in jumping or running. Don't add load to them. Let them run or let them jump, but don't add weight to them unless they're superhuman and we've got to find some other way of challenging them. You may encounter such people, in which case they defy the norm, but that's not your normal athlete. But generally speaking, how do we make sure they have good form? Keep doing it slow, keep it every day, as repetitive as possible. It must be controlled. What's control mean? You have to define the parameters very clearly in terms of range of motion, what joint actions you're looking for, what looks fluid, what looks smooth, and sometimes you can tell by comparing one athlete to another. Might just, rather than saying all of you are not as good as so-and-so, but just watch so-and-so. That is fluid, that is smooth, that's what I want you to do. Or pull up a video showing Usain Bolt sprinting or something like that, whereby a person, you can see someone for being fluid and smooth. And that might be the nth degree of level. Maybe you're not expecting someone to get there by tomorrow, but that is the goal. We want to show them what they're aiming toward, okay? So it's clear as possible. We don't want people uncontrolled. Uncontrolled means uncontrolled results, uncontrolled performance, and certainly not beneficial to the possibility of reducing risk or injury, going to increase the probability, okay? That said, muscle memory is a term a couple of you used recently. I want to make sure it's very clear here. There's no such thing as muscle memory. Muscles can't remember anything. Now, we're utilizing terms that often people use in common vernacular, but the fact of the matter is, you need to make sure you understand this, there's no such thing as muscle memory. The nervous system, in recognition with the muscular system, specifically the central nervous system communicating to the peripheral nervous system to fire the right muscle fibers at the right time, in the right sequence, that's what we're looking for when people often refer to muscle memory. Okay, running economy, to make sure this one's clear, a lot of you still appear to be a little confused between exercise efficiency and running economy. The book doesn't necessarily do a great job of describing that, even though it's not incorrect. It just doesn't make it as clear as maybe it could be. I want to make sure you understand that you can be efficient in exercise, but you're not necessarily going to be economical running-wise. And likewise, you can be economical in running, but then maybe you perform some other like overhead press or squat or something like that, and you're not efficient exercise-wise, because it's very movement-specific, number one. Secondly, when it comes to running economy, you must have running skill. Always starts with skill, how well you move. If you can't run well, then we don't run faster. We don't run harder. We don't run longer. We've got to get the skill concept down. If they break down 5 minutes in, then 5 minutes is the current time frame we use for running. If they can run at top speed for 3 seconds, then, and our goal is to maximize speed, I wouldn't go much more than 3 seconds. Now that's very generalized, but that's generally what we're going for here. Got to make sure we're very clear about skill being ideal. If they break down, the head starts going back and forth, the arms are crossing their body as they run, you're practicing bad form. You're practicing poor running skill. You're decreasing running economy, not increasing it, not improving it. Make sure you understand that. Running at controlled variable speeds over time, of course, so you get better at conditioning with those particular speeds. And of course, then on top of that, adding flexibility, mobility, speed, endurance, and of course, strength in general. Those are all aspects of strength, by the way. Flexibility, mobility, speed, endurance, let alone just calling it strength in general. But that said, make sure, people often say adding strength to anything is good. Not necessarily. Going to go right back to that same basic example every time. If skill is not there first, don't add more higher levels of strength. Get skill down first. Lactic acid is a non-factor. Stop referring to, those of you who do refer to it, don't refer to lactic acid as being the cause of muscle fatigue or the cause of burning sensation. Lactic acid is a non-factor. Can't make it any more clear. It's far too often referred to in many circles as being the cause of muscular fatigue or the reason why you need to take a rest or whatnot, and that's just not the case. It's the consistent or the more increased level of buildup of lactate and excess hydrogen ion development, and those excess hydrogen ions are a response to the conversion of ATP and breaking apart the bonds and creating inorganic phosphate and creating these excess hydrogen ions that are a part of this process, and then those excess hydrogen ions block receptor sites on the muscle fibers themselves. And we mentioned this last week's video. I'll make sure you're getting this though. And they inhibit ATP from being able to bind, or actually aspects of ATP, specifically at the troponin sites, to be able to bind and consequently be able to increase muscular contractions. What you need to do, of course, is rest for the appropriate period so that you can actually remove metabolic waste and actually replenish proper blood flow, which means, of course, yes, drinking water, eating proper foods, but more importantly in this moment, getting the proper amount of time between sets where you come back and try to do that same level of exercise again. If you're tired, when you're talking about someone being worn down and they're engaging in significantly highly intense exercise, you are way beyond your lactate threshold. And this was mentioned in the textbook. It was mentioned in the video before. I want to make sure this is very clear. When you say lactate threshold, when you start to get a little bit fatigued, you're not at the lactate threshold. You're way past it. Okay, you are way past it. It's when you slightly, very, very slightly start to lose your ability to produce force not very efficiently, and more specifically form breaks down to the slightest levels, you're already passing your lactate threshold for the muscles that are involved in exercise. Because when we refer to lactate threshold, if you remember what the book actually mentioned, it's referring to exercise that you could actually maintain for 12 to 15 minutes or longer. Really referring to exercise you could do it's like your marathon pace. Okay, it's like something for ultra endurance type runners. That's what we're talking about. When you talk about improving lactate threshold, you're improving the capacity to handle a given stress for very long times. When you're talking about increasing the ability to perform at high intensities, it's not lactate threshold we're necessarily trying to specifically improve. I want to make sure you understand that. And you wouldn't not be wrong, and if you improve lactate threshold, it's going to help, sure, but they are not the same. Okay, RPE is 10. Rate of perceived exertion. My perception of how high I'm going to be giving effort-wise, if I am full-on sprinting, which is adenosine triphosphate ATP level work, 1 to 5 seconds, maybe a little less than 5 seconds, but 1 to 5 seconds of work, 100% maximal force output. It doesn't matter what, if they're going absolutely maximal speed, they're going to feel like it's a level 10 RPE. Or they're not going to be running at their highest level they've ever run. If they say it's a level 6 or 7 or 8, then they're not running at max speed. It's just that simple. Okay, and from a standpoint of creatine phosphate, well, as you start pushing harder, you're running, or you're exerting anything at high levels of effort. When we refer to creatine phosphate, ATP type work, yeah, the more you start moving, there's no question the muscle fibers that are engaging in movement in the first initiation of a motion, your body first goes to utilization of ATP, then creatine phosphate, then glycolysis, and then aerobic oxidation. That's absolutely true. But when we're talking about improving performance parameters, we're talking about maximal force output, and you're starting to engage in ATP level performance type work, 1 to 5 seconds. Creatine phosphate, which is a broad range, anywhere between 5 seconds to 10 seconds, what your book refers to. That's fine to say that. Some of you are saying 15 seconds. You're right. Up to 30 seconds, you would be correct. Any of those are true. Somewhere in there, somewhere between 10 to 30 seconds, glycolysis kicks in as the primary energy system. It's dependent upon the individual and their conditioning and their genetics and whatnot. So if you say anything of those numbers, you would be correct. Okay? That said, if you're exerting at maximal effort, you're going to be at 10 RPE, even though your actual force output at ATP level is 100%. Okay? Creatine phosphate level is like 90-95%. All right, and the maximal levels of glycolysis is about 90%, going down as low as 70-75%, somewhere in there, force output wise, even though, let's make this clear, your glycolytic work is going to be a 10 RPE. Okay? The only time you're going to see a lesser RPE is when someone's either you're trying to teach skill, you're trying to engage basic light things, but generally speaking, the RPE should be fairly high, unless you're starting to talk about the lower levels of glycolysis, certainly not talking about high intensity intervals. It's going to be lesser, maybe 7, 8, that kind of thing. But certainly creatine phosphate, ATP, it's going to be 10. And the higher levels of glycolytic performance, meaning close to that 30-second time frame, 30, 40 seconds, that's going to be a 10. Okay, we're awfully close to it. But certainly not going to be a 7 or an 8 unless you're engaging exercise for a couple minutes or longer. Okay, and that said, if they tell you it's less, you can be sure of one thing: they're probably not their maximal speeds or their maximal efforts, which you probably know because you've been recording that data, which is why you want to make sure you're recording all this data. So you can say, hey, you may tell you're level 7 or 8, and that's kind of what I'm seeing right here. That's not your maximal output. We're looking for maximal output here. The expectation for someone going for 2 minutes is somewhere around perfect world, 80-85% of force output for top athletes, maybe closer to 75% or a little less for lesser athletes of their maximal force output. Okay. Now, that said, in clarifying as best we can here, and we'll keep talking about this throughout the course until everybody gets it, until it's very clear in how we refer to exercise when it comes to work periods, rest periods. And you better believe every single week I'm going to continually ask you that question: what's your work period? What's your rest period? What's your force output? And probably what's your RPE? And in units to come, we're not there yet, I'm going to ask you VO2 max. What's the VO2 max expectation if it's aerobic type work? And what is your heart rate expectation, generally speaking? So you're going to get a lot of numbers you're going to have to put out there every single time until it becomes so straightforward that it rolls off your tongue. It just makes perfect sense, like it does to me, only from the standpoint of that I've been done it so many times. You have not. So of course it's not going to make that much sense. But you have to do it repetitively, just like anyone trying to learn a skill, right? That said, intensity versus work to rest ratios, be careful about using the ratio concept. A lot of books say that 1 to 5 work to rest, 1 to 10, 1 to 12, 1 to 20. Don't do it. Don't do it, because now we've actually already clarified your work period is based upon the expectation of force output and where energy system that puts you in, and then therefore how much rest you're going to need to replenish energy for that particular energy system. It's already there. So there's no reason to even talk about ratios. Look at absolute rest, and you'll know. And how will you know if it's correct? Well, if they could not repeat the same set at that rest, they're going to need more rest. If a person can't rest in 90 seconds and you're going to have them go again for 30 seconds like you're expecting a glycolytic level performance, and they can't repeat that performance, then whatever your expectation of either maybe 30 seconds is too long, maybe go out, try it 20 seconds or 15 seconds, or maybe lower the intensity, or maybe say, hey, maybe you're not ready for this level of glycolytic conditioning today, or maybe you're not ready in general. That's a difficult question. That has to be very individual to determine that exact meaning, if it's really based upon today only, tomorrow you'll be able to do this, next week you'll be able to do this, or you're just not ready yet. We need more aerobic level conditioning. We need more strength as a whole before we start engaging in higher intensity intervals. Okay? But high intensity in general, maximal intensity, 100% force output is adenosine triphosphate, somewhere in the 1 to 5 second range. If you said 2 seconds, you'd be correct. 3, you'd be correct. 4, you're correct. 5, you're correct. Okay? There's a range in there. It's not an exact number. For anyone looking for an exact number, there is no such thing. You can even argue maybe it's almost 6 seconds. Okay? But generally speaking, referring to 1 to 5 seconds. And when you start going anywhere between 5 to 30 seconds, you're looking at anywhere between 90 and 95% force output probabilities or capability. And it's creatine phosphate mostly in the early stages of that, moving more and more into glycolysis somewhere in there. Exactly where it's unknown, but that said, somewhere in there, okay? Your book refers to 10 seconds or even 8 seconds in one section of the book refers to creatine phosphate is down so low, glycolysis has to kick in. It's not wrong. It could be true, but research has shown some athletes don't significantly delve into more glycolytic pathway than creatine phosphate, even up to 30 seconds. Okay, and that said, when we're talking about our rest period, 3 to 5 minutes for ATP replenishment, 2 to 3 minutes for creatine phosphate replenishment. Okay, somewhere in there. Not less than 2 minutes for creatine phosphate. Don't go 2 minutes and expect to get a response for ATP. If you ever tried to run consecutive 40-yard dashes as an example, very simple thing, run all-out maximal speed, there's no way on earth you're going to be able to rest for 90 seconds or less. If you're truly getting your top speed, fast as you've ever run before, you're not going to be able to maintain that speed if you rest for anything less than 3 minutes or more. Okay? I would stake everything that I've ever seen research-wise and any athlete I've ever worked with on that. And I would love it if you found one that was not the case. They could actually do it in less rest. You've got a freak on your hands. That's a positive, okay? But that's not the norm. So let's take care of everyone as the norm and worry about people who are freakishly talented with some possible different parameters when that situation arises, okay? But don't refer to them in the generality. Moderately high intensity, we start going anaerobic into toward aerobic with glycolytic type responses, anywhere between probably roughly at 30-second range. Again, could be less, but 30 seconds is a fair number. Upward to about 2 minutes is mostly anaerobic, no question about it. Okay, and starting to become more and more aerobic. Could be as high as at 2 minutes of work, consistent work without stopping. Could be as high as about a 60% anaerobic and 40% aerobic. Some people say 50-50. Some research has shown that's 50-50 aerobic to anaerobic at about 2 minutes. Not for a high conditioned athlete, it's not. Try 70-30 for a highly conditioned athlete anaerobically who is a high performer. It could be more like 2/3 anaerobic, only 1/3 aerobic. It's going to be some variation there. Okay, so you would not be wrong if you say any of those numbers. Just don't say it is. It's 50-50. It is 70-30. It's going to vary a little bit. Okay. And the force output's about 75-90% force output. Usain Bolt cannot maintain a 9.58 repetitively for a couple minutes. He can't do it. He's going to drop off. And you'll notice that in the world records, if you compare them, you try to add Usain Bolt's 100-meter dash as an example. We refer to sprinting because it's pure, it's simple. You can measure it. You can either make it from this point to this point fast, or you can't. That's why I love that as a parameter. Same with jumping vertically. You can either jump this high or you can't. It's not requiring you to throw something. It's not requiring you to lift something, which are all fair as assessments to use. But we're talking about any sport requiring speed and explosiveness. I want to know, ultimately, can you run fast over whatever distance we need in this particular sport? And can you jump high in whatever height we need to be seeing you jump to in this particular sport? Okay? And that's your true parameter recognition of absolute speed and power. Okay? Everything else can be used, but those are really your best bets. Not trying to do Olympic lifts as your primary. Secondary. Not primary. Too skill specific, okay? But you can certainly use them. Moderate to low intensity work is what that glycolytic type work is. We start getting that 2 to 3 minute time frame. And why would you say 30 seconds, 60 seconds rest? Well, if you're a high performer, you can replenish up to 90% of ATP in 30 seconds. So you could actually go for up to 90 seconds with 30 seconds rest if you're, or 2 minutes work with 30 seconds rest if you're a freak of nature, if you're impressive. I've yet to see very many more than 1 or 2 athletes I've ever worked with my entire life who could do that, okay? And those people are conference champions at the college level or better, okay? At the D1 level. That's who we're talking about. People who can do that kind of stuff, okay? You might have some, but it's unusual, all right? We're more than likely to see someone who can perform 60 to 90 seconds of work and then have a 30-second rest period. Everybody else is probably going to need more like a 60-60, 60 seconds work, 60 seconds rest, or have to go to 30 seconds work, 90 seconds rest, because they're not going to have the conditioning capacity, both either genetically and or over time, developing that capacity for glycolytic performance. It takes a while, okay? Low intensity aerobic type work, we're talking about anything that's 3 minutes or beyond. Starts around 2 minutes, but really to be pretty much near full aerobic oxidation energy system utilization with very little glycolysis involvement, 3 minutes and beyond. Force output, 70-75%. We say 70% here. You would not be wrong because it's 75%, but 70% or less maybe as low as 60-65% for some people, force output wise, they start engaging in 30 seconds or 3 minutes or longer of activity. And someone who's really low conditioned, maybe 50% of their max force output at about 3 minutes. They have very little aerobic conditioning. That's what you're seeing right there. Then when someone wanes significantly in the first few minutes of exercise, they have very little aerobic conditioning, and that is needs to be a focus point for you. And when you train that, and I kind of got after a few of you in your discussion board posts, don't just think of just pure running distance-wise unless your sport needs it. I can't imagine a football player outside of the off season needing to do a whole lot of just running long distance type work. You can, but it's really going to not really help you a great deal. You need to be engaging in some drill type work that's fairly low intensity, but that's not for really long periods necessarily, except for recovery days. Yeah, a football player could possibly go for a jog. That would not be a bad thing on a lighter day. That's what when you're working on the aerobic type recovery type work, or at the very end of your training session for football. But you have to understand that in football becomes more and more aerobic as the game progresses through the quarters, right? Players that play all through the game are going to be working more and more aerobic the later that game goes, okay? Homeostatic control and challenges. You want to make sure you understand, we're going to talk about this concept of eustress and distress in a second here, that you want to stay within the gain of your system. You're going to challenge the gain right at that point, wherever that level is. Someone who's deconditioned has a very little gain, very little range away from homeostasis. They can handle stress, whereby they can still return to homeostasis and thereby get benefit and adapt properly to the stress to get stronger and increase their gain. When you increase the stress beyond the gain of the system, all you get is poor recovery and a person getting tired and worn down, and you lose adaptation. This is very important. We get so caught up and have to push harder. That's just not true. On a given day, you have to push lighter. Certain days you can push a little harder, but you still have to stay within the gain of the system. Okay? And what is that gain? You'll know. Because if they can maintain their form, if they're improving, if they're getting stronger, and they're looking better, you're seeing some gain in the system. That's what you're seeing. But if day to day it's erratic, then you're overly challenging them in some manner, whether it's work, rest, or intensity. Work duration, intensity itself, or rest. Something isn't right. You've got to work on the parameters of designing that properly so you don't see that. And that's not easy. It's not. Okay? That said, specifically, what disturbances we're talking about? Well, as we move into week 3, exercise has eustress or distress. If you improve because of the exercise, that exercise level, intensity, work, duration, whatever we're talking about here, that was eustress. However, if you get worn down, if you go to the point at the end of your set, you're failing, you're going into distress. You've proceeded too long in the set, or proceeded to try to pursue too high of a level of force output. Something is wrong there mechanically. Who knows? Whatever that point of breakdown is, we now have distress. The exercise should cease. We should be seeking rest and then coming back and trying to do it again. If they can't repeat it, then we're done for the day. Well, what do you mean we can't repeat it? If your second set isn't as good or better than your first, if your fifth set isn't as good or better than your first, second, third, and fourth, then we should be stopping. We shouldn't be trying to get worse as each set goes by as a form of conditioning. You're training poor response. We're not getting better. The whole goal is to be getting better. Don't force the issue. Some coaches use training as punishment. That's a psychological thing, your tactic you're using right now. It is not a physiological benefit. Don't confuse the two. That said, increasing metabolism. The metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical and physiological processes of converting food into energy. The higher your metabolism, the more calories you can burn. That's true, but don't talk about calories. Okay, that's a side effect. That's a side benefit. It's really systemically your body's more efficient. Okay, it can do more with less. You can exert more force. You can do more things. You get tired less easy. A lot of things happen positively by increasing metabolism. And the only way you increase metabolism is through exercise, through movement. If you don't move, you don't increase your metabolism. Proper diet, proper nutrition, proper sleep, proper life stress, all those things will help keep your stress down to a minimum so you can enhance your metabolism, but the only way you actually increase it is going to be with exercise, okay? And as far as a general adaptation syndrome, we're looking for the right stress to meet the benefit of the job. If you know you can handle this much stress, don't try and go here, okay? If we already know what the maximal is, well, your maximal is what you can handle for a few seconds. So there's no reason to be challenging the maximal unless we're only going for a few seconds. We have to have 3 to 5 minutes rest. We're not going for maximal? Okay. Then if you want to go for 30 seconds, okay, it's near maximal maybe. Maybe it's 85, 90, 95%, depending on the person, of maximal force. That could be the case. Okay, adrenaline, epinephrine, the adrenal gland. We're talking about those hormones being secreted during times of stress. Okay, from the adrenal gland. And caffeine can enhance that, but also blocks adrenal receptors. You want to be very careful with that. Insulin is not a bad thing. It's secreted to take up carbohydrate when the system takes in a lot of carbohydrate. Insulin is not the enemy, and neither is carbohydrate. Glucagon takes away fat, or actually metabolizes fat. So when insulin goes up, glucagon goes down. When glucagon goes up, insulin goes down. Okay? Cortisol is a stress hormone. More cortisol is secreted, more stress to the system. The more stress the system engages, more cortisol is secreted. However, that's not necessarily bad unless cortisol remains in the system following exercise for many minutes after, for many days after. The goal is to get the proper rest after, to get the right intensity, so we minimize cortisol. Cortisol is a natural response, and it's going to actually metabolize fat, but the problem is it's also going to catabolize the system if you don't rid the body of cortisol as soon as possible, returning to homeostasis following exercise. Testosterone, estrogen are sex hormones. Every male or female has levels of testosterone or estrogen. Testosterone is going to be higher in most males from the standpoint that you can actually increase more muscle mass when you have more testosterone. Estrogen, female-wise, is very important for sex hormones, and men have levels of estrogen as well, but most likely males are going to have much higher levels of testosterone. They're going to be able to produce much more muscle mass. Just because you have more testosterone does not necessarily mean you're going to be huge with big muscles, because it depends upon training, not just genetics and testosterone, but there's no way you're going to have large muscles and be significantly powerful if you don't have high levels of testosterone. How do you maximize that? You got to make sure you get the proper rest, particularly fats in your diet. Fats aid testosterone more than anything else. Okay, because hormonal response and hormonal development is, although created primarily by proteins, when it comes to sex hormones, it's fats that develop the sex hormones. So consequently, get better fats in your diet, okay? And they're secreted by luteinizing hormone activating the anterior pituitary. IGF, insulin-like growth factor, also plays a role in the response for muscle mass development, for force production, from the anterior pituitary, and we have to make sure we have proper rest between sets to be able to enhance that, get that proper response. If we don't get testosterone response, we don't get the IGF response. If you get too much of an insulin response or cortisol response, you don't get the maximization of testosterone and IGF. Okay? Thyroxine via thyroid is a big hormone. It relates to fatigue. People have thyroid-related issues, oftentimes due to endurance level stress. High levels of stress for too long of a period. Reduce the stress, increase the rest. And of course, inflammation and immunity. Inflammation is a natural response to stress. Your body will have inflammation. You'll be creating inflammation, responding to any stress you engage. However, can your body reduce the inflammation quickly? It can respond fast? And that's going to depend upon, again, your work and rest ratios, not having too high of chronic stress. Chronic inflammation is a newer relative stress. In the last 20, 30 years or so, people are experiencing levels of stress they have never felt before, predominantly because they're experiencing levels of stress in life they never experienced before. Even though we have higher levels of technology and other things to help us, it actually increases more stress because people feel like they need to get more done. There's more life stress. Exercise-wise, there's this constant push for we have to improve. So sometimes people engage in too much stress. That also increases too much inflammation for some people if you don't get the proper work-rest ratios, let alone the proper diet, the proper sleep, and the proper life stress. When we talk about exercise physiology, every single time you bring up sleep or nutrition or life stress, I'm going to ask you, okay, fair enough. You're not wrong. However, how does that relate for the exercise component? Because this is an exercise physiology course, and the only way you improve metabolism, the only way you get stronger, faster, more endurance, can do more work, be a better performer in sport, is to increase your ability to move better, which is exercise. Everything else supports it. It is not the primary. Okay? Final thoughts. Keep improving. You're doing much better with your posts, but you've got to be specific. I'm always going to ask you specific questions, although you're never going to be graded down upon whether or not you respond to me. If you don't respond to me, you're clearly missing information. You do need to respond adequately to your fellow students so you can get the most from this class, so you can better apply your information, and you can all get better as coaches. That said, we have an exam in 2 weeks, paper in 3 weeks. Be ready for that. Pay attention to the course announcements every day. Call or email me if you have questions, and I'll look forward to another good week. We'll talk to you again soon.